To go is Ormond Drake, Associate Dean of New York and Director of the Town Hall. Today, Professor Drake's guest is Dr. Roy A. Burkhart, Senior Minister of the First Community Church in Columbus, Ohio.
It is very important for us to have the right attitude, the right image, the right feeling, the right thinking. If the mind is healthy, if it is a part of the universal mind, then the mind is whole, and every cell in the body will reflect it. God does not create disease. God is not a God of disease. God is a God of life, a God of health. Now, the book from which I've been reading is called The Freedom to Become Yourself. It has a very important message in it, full of promise. A profound message it is indeed. But it's extremely personal, directed at you and directed at me. I tell you frankly, I think it's one of the most exciting books that I've ever read. It's only one of about 15 or more volumes that my guest, Dr. Roy Burkhart, has written in his life. And you and I today are going to visit about the contents and the meaning of this volume. But I think perhaps we ought to start by learning a little more about Dr. Burkhart personally and about that great church of his down in Columbus, Ohio. Dr. Burkhart, it's called a community church, isn't it?
It is a community church. There are 46 denominations represented, and a number of former Roman Catholics are members. I think nearly 500. And then many men and women who never belonged to a church are members of this church. And you may ask, well, why? Well, because we impose no creed upon them in First Community. They can come on their own terms. Now, it is true, we have a creed. They can accept it or they can present their own. For instance, not long ago, a scientist came. He said, I can't accept this creed. I said, well, present your own. And this is the one he presented. He said, I join this church with the understanding I'll be free to seek the truth, and with the further understanding that I'll live it in love.
See, that's the thing that surprises me about a community church, because I confess that the idea I had about a community church was just that the community got together and built one so they could have a large structure for their money instead of 4 or 5 small ones.
Now,
but you're talking creed change.
Well, that's true. You have a point. The early church, incidentally, the Church of Ephesus and Rome and Alexandria were community churches. They had no label but community and no head but Christ. And there are a number of communities that can only support one church. And this is valid. And there is also a logic to it. The Roman Catholics are wise. They have a school for each church district. And if the Protestant were equally wise, they would have a school for a church for each school district. Then children could go to the same church as they go to the same school. They cheer for the same team and worship before the same altar.
And still, it's the spiritual aspect of your church that interests me the most.
Well, yes, because in our church, we don't ask people to think the same, because if they do, somebody's telling them how to think. This is what happens in the communist regime. If a way of thinking is imposed upon people, then the integrity of the person is destroyed. We don't want them to think the same. We want them to think. We don't want sameness. We want union.
I was actually surprised when I read the preface to this little book about your church, and the part that surprised me are these words. You say, here there is no interest in imposing a faith. I thought that churches were in the business to impose faith.
Well, many churches do, but Professor Drake, I think this destroys personality. We don't impose a faith. We provide a relationship in which people find a freedom to build a faith that really works in their personal lives.
That word freedom is very important to you, evidently, because it's in your book. It's on every page of your book.
What is more important in the world than freedom? We're all against tyranny, aren't we? Many men have died across the centuries to win freedom. And so freedom is really pretty basic. Jesus said, if you know the truth will make you free.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's important for us to understand freedom. It's not license. If I would sit down at the piano in the homes of some of our listeners, I would be free in the idea of some people. That is, I'd play without any regard to the harmony, but people would run. Mm-hmm. Now, that is not freedom. That's license. That's dumbness. That's stupidity. But if a great musician sat down, he would play in harmony with the laws. He would play in light of the laws of harmony, and then he'd produce music to which even the angels would listen. And this is what we mean by freedom. If I am in harmony with the will that runs the universe, then I'm free, really, to become my fullest self.
Now, is there something about your community church in Columbus, Ohio, that suggests to me that there is more of this freedom to be found there than in some other churches? I don't want any charges made here, but obviously you have something in mind.
Well, there is a great quality of freedom. It runs from the time a baby is conceived across all the seasons of life. This element of freedom, it doesn't mean that a child isn't curbed, that he isn't guided.
Yeah.
Because if one can become impulse-ridden, he's not free, he's sick. But a child learns to make choices in light of the wisdom of the universe. And this runs through the entire gamut of life as far as our church is concerned.
I know that we couldn't possibly look into all the great activities you have in your church, but let me ask you the question that to me pays the greatest dividends. Is this demonstrated by your congregation? I mean, pragmatically, do they show the results of this kind of program?
Well, Professor Drake, during the war, for instance, we had 646 men and women in the armed service, and we didn't have one person discharged for psychoneurotic reasons. When Carl Menninger, the great psychiatrist of Topeka, heard of this, he was in Columbus once, he spent a weekend at our church. And this may sound a little immodest, but this is exactly what he said. The greatest job in mental hygiene being done any place in America is done at First Community. And why did he think so? It's because we start early.
Yes.
You see, we start really before the baby's conceived by working with a couple before they're married. And this guidance runs across all the seasons of life until the person's through in this dimension. We focus in a family that it might be healthy. We try to help each person come to find out who he is. And if I know who I am, then you, in your relationship with me, will feel understood. And this is basic in every relationship of life. And
so the program seems to be one of discovering oneself,
yes,
and
to
acting upon his
self-understanding.
potentials.
And to move from self-understanding, actually, to know the person you can love. Because really, kindness must start with Professor Drake, or it'll never reach out to anybody else.
Yes.
For some strange reason, people think that selfishness and self-love are the same, but that's not true. Selfishness is narcissism, and when one is selfish, he hates himself, really. But when I come to know the person I can love, I begin to focus on you. I'm no longer the object, I'm a channel, and you become the real issue.
I noticed that on the jacket, the cover of your book, that you were born, I shouldn't say born a Mennonite, but your family were Mennonite. You're born a
Mennonite and a Republican, too.
That's quite a combination. It certainly is a combination in respect to what you're doing now, because the Mennonites were somewhat removed from this thesis, were they?
Well, there was one thing about the Mennonite church that's pretty important. They believed in nonviolence. They believed in love.
Oh, so...
And this was very basic. They're very spiritual also. But, of course, they, on the other hand, are pretty authoritarian. You believe as they believe in all respects, or you're out.
Well, that's what I had in mind.
For instance, when I went to the First World War, I was out. Now, the reason I went, my father, of course, was against the war, but he was forced to buy a Liberty bond. And when he gave $1,000 for a Liberty bond, I said, well, Father, I must go. If your money goes, your son has to go. And then, of course, I married a girl from another church which violated the law of the church, and I was out in 2 counts, and I never got back in.
Well, it may be a good thing. Well, when did you go to Columbus, Dr. Burkhart?
Well, we moved to Columbus in 1935.
As you talked to me, and you talked so enthusiastically about your work, not only now, but in our little previous visit, you talked so enthusiastically about this work, and the work seems to be so different than the usual churches carrying on, that I'm led to believe you must have had some early opposition, didn't you, to your program?
Well, I think when you pioneer, you are bound to have some opposition. But the opposition always was a blessing. When I went there in Columbus, the first thing I did was to go to see the chiefs of police. I went to the probate court. Then I visited doctors, psychiatrists. I visited the principals of the schools in the community. And then I visited the high school to spot the key people. Because if you win the pivot young person, you'll get the crowd, you'll get the mass. I visited the university and incidentally picked out 21 young people that I wanted to start to work with, and won 20, and they're still active, and they're scattered all over the world. Then soon I discovered there was no place really for the young people to have fun. And one of the first things we did was to form what was called Bar None. It was once written up in the American magazine.
Bar None?
Yes.
And you took in everybody?
Well, it means no bar, nobody barred.
I see.
It was a social program at night with dancing and folk games, and we even had a floor show of a high level.
Yeah.
And this bothered a lot of ministers, and they opposed us. But the interesting thing is they drove people to us.
Brought you a lot of followers.
Well, sort of like Henry Ford said, I don't care what they say as long as they mention my name. So the opposition was a blessing, really, though there is a factor here I think I ought to point out, that if a minister resents me, it hurts him. And if it hurts him, it hurts his church. If it hurts his church, it hurts my church.
Hurts everybody.
So there is a factor there that's important.
Doctor, let's get back to the book, because the heart of this book to me was a most revealing thing. I confess it. I've read every word of it, and I liked all of it, but I don't think that I fully understand all of it. I'm sure the listener doesn't either. The Freedom to Become Yourself is its title. What does this title really mean?
Well,
what are the implications other than just the words?
It means this, that a lot of people are born in relationships where tyrannies grow up naturally. They grow up learning to hate themselves, or they become full of rage, or they begin to buck the universe. There are all kinds of things happen to them. So they become imprisoned. They're under various kinds of tyranny. An illustration of tyranny, for instance, is the person who has an anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the whole idea is of this book to help people get into relationships where they find the freedom really to become the real self.
Why should he become his real self? Is this the end and aim of everything?
This is the whole goal of life.
For a man to reach his potential, you mean?
Well, sure. Breasted at the University of Chicago studied all the cultures of the world, and he said as he looked at them, there is one motive, and that is the production of man at his best and in his fullest.
So that he becomes, does he thus become, by extension, master of his, can we say with William Henley, for example, I'm the, what is it, master of my fate,
Absolutely.
I'm the captain of my
Man
soul?
actually becomes the incarnation of God. He is the image of God. He may be a distortion or a caricature, but the goal is for him to achieve the likeness of this image, and then there is no limit to what he can be.
In one spot in your book, you write this: you, meaning the reader, create the climate of your soul. You're not the victim of circumstances. Instead, you create your own circumstances. You're not the slave of events. You initiate and shape events. Now, I could take that in several ways, in several degrees. Am I to take that literally? That a man does shape his own universe?
Well, yes, every man does. Now, it is true that some people are victims. They're pushed around. They become the victims of various kinds of circumstances, but even so, they make the choices that either lead to sickness and body or mind, or the choices lead to the wholeness of body and the wholeness of mind.
Doctor, if I had to read one thesis in the whole volume, in this particular book, I would say that the thing that stands out most to me is the tremendous power that you have assigned to the human mind. Now, of course, all of us know that that's the great difference between man and animal. But everything that is in this book seems to arrive, first of all, out of control of man's mind. Do you assign that importance to it?
Well, it's all important. The Bible says, as a man thinketh, so is he. And therefore, it's very important. Now, take, for instance, one time I saw Dr. John J.B. Morgan hypnotize a boy in a class. I was attending at the University of Chicago. Dr. Morgan now is in the next dimension. Under hypnosis, he told this boy that his body had the sturdiness of a bar of steel.
Yes.
Then he put the back of his head in one chair, his heels in another chair, and 3 of us sat on his body and didn't give a bit. Now, what happened under hypnosis? He was freed from all limitation.
Yes.
And we saw demonstrated the tremendous potential of his mind when it was free from limitation.
Now, this isn't the potential of his mind, is it? This is the potential of his mind linked into, communicated with, somehow or other connected to a universal thing.
Professor Drake, that's absolutely true. Because, you see, we didn't create ourselves. Our minds are part of the universal mind. and it's possible for one to move from the limits of his mind at the moment toward the infinity that is in the universal mind.
So just studying a man himself doesn't give you the answer. Indeed, you can get the answer to man very well, can you? Just
but you start with man, and you begin to see the clues, and this leads you actually to come to comprehend, and this is revealed
more
in
than
Jesus.
The body.
There's something, man is more than his body.
Mm-hmm. What was it that wasn't it the great surgeon Penfield who
yes,
did something?
Dr. Penfield, the great surgeon in Montreal, he was trying to locate the organizer, the seat of wisdom in the mind, and he thought he did. So he performed a local, he performed an operation, local anesthesia. Then he played a ray of light on this so-called organizer, and the man moved his hand, and everybody was thrilled. Then the man said, "Why did I move my hands?" And then
he couldn't answer that.
Then Dr. Penfield said, "Well, where is the person that resisted me?" Which is to say that you have a brain, but you are a mind. If somebody opened your skull, they'd see your brain cells, but they wouldn't see your thoughts. They wouldn't see your memory. If they fluoroscope your heart, they can see it, but they can't see love.
Yes.
Which leads us to feel that we have a body, but we are a living spirit. We're part of the universal spirit.
When you talk about this universal spirit, it isn't something I can reach out and touch with my hand. It isn't something that I respond to with sense of smell or even sight. Am I to come to this understanding, Dr. Burkhart, that however, in this studio, in the home, everywhere, is this so-called universal mind, and that somehow or other I can tap its resources?
That's true. The great things of life can't be seen. They can't be put in a test tube. You can't see love. And yet we know that love is the greatest thing in the world. Because if a person isn't loved, he gets sick.
Yeah.
I've never seen a troubled personality where the one identifiable factor wasn't that somebody forgot to love the person. You can't see love, but you can know it. You can't prove to me, for instance, you love your wife. Mm-hmm. Yet if I saw her, I'd know whether you love her or not. A man can't prove he loves his children. But if he doesn't, the whole world will find it out. But if he does, the whole world will know it. So we can't feel, we can't touch this spirit, but we can know it. We can't prove it, but we can know it. It's the realest thing, really, in the whole world.
What word do you use when you talk about being in communion with it? Do you say tap the spirit, or
tune in, or
tune in on the
or
spirit?
Become a part of it, or become aware?
Yeah.
I think maybe awareness is the best.
Of it. If this is such a potential, does my logic err when I suggest that, as someone one time told me, that everything that is to be in this world at some time or other, every machine, every invention, every theory that one time will be set forth by a man, presently exists. It's just a matter of somebody tuning in, as you say, to
I think in a deep sense, everything that is to be, or that will be, is actually in the mind of God.
Yes.
But for some interesting reason, God has put us in an unfinished world. If the world were finished, we wouldn't be on this program. The universities would close. All research centers would close. All business would close. We'd have nothing to do. And frankly, you and I couldn't bear it. So in the Creator's wisdom, he put us in an unfinished world that we might have the wonderful opportunity of being exalted to the high level, of helping him finish it. And in the finishing it, we grow, we become.
Is this what you mean by the phrase, the soul is Gothic, a phrase from your book which I like very much?
Yes,
meaning
because
that
the soul is Gothic. You never get to the place, really, where you're satisfied. Now, of course, there are those people who confuse peace with death. The most peaceful thing in the world is death. But the healthy soul always has visions of truth that never let it go. For instance, I was in Tulsa, Oklahoma one time, and I saw a church tower, and I was interested in it, and somebody said that a woman gave $100,000 to build it and made only one stipulation, that it would look to all succeeding generations as if it were incomplete. Two lovers never get enough of love. No man who devoted truth ever gets enough. There are always visions of truth that never let him go. Even Jesus, when he came to the end of his life, said, I go to the Father.
Doctor, to come to redirect the conversation just a little bit, a little more to the power of the mind and the great resource that this mind has if it can tap it. Could I ask you a little bit about your thoughts respecting the nature of this mind and its ability to think? The power of thought, in other words. Is this something one can measure as we can measure certain other things?
Yes, I think it can be measured. For instance, in our church, we have what we call the 7 keys. And a woman who's a polio is completely paralyzed conceived the idea of a reminder. There it is.
Yeah.
And I think, for instance, we can evaluate the degree to which we're tuning in or becoming aware of this universal mind by such things as this. To what degree do I see clearly?
Yeah.
To what degree do I have a faith that's reason that grows me courageous? To what degree am I loving and free to love? To what degree can I accept instead of bucking the universe? To what degree can I put myself into a situation fully, or am I walled in? And the end point of a walled-in person is a catatonic, a schizophrenic. To what degree can I forgive? Or to what degree do I hold guilt and spite and so forth? And to what degree am I a channel of healing? Or you might put it this way, to what degree do I know joy? Am I free to love and be loved? Do I see so clearly that I'm never disturbed, but just concerned?
Yeah.
You see, these are ways by which we can evaluate. Now, you can see it in many instances. For instance, here's a wife who called me and said, "Oh, come." She and her husband belong to no church. "My husband is about to die of cancer, and he's cursing God. And if he dies cursing God, he'll be eternally lost." She said, "Will you come immediately?" I said, "Well, sure, but before I come, let me say this, that he's this moment in God's love."
Even though he's cursing God?
Yes. Nothing he can do would make God stop loving him. The important thing for you is to just carry your husband into the light. I left. When I got over to the hospital, the husband had passed an agony he couldn't bear and entered a state of euphoria. And in a few hours, he, as we say, graduated in amazing peace, and the woman was amazed. She'll never get over it. And this is something of the basic way in which God feels. And when we feel and think in these terms, then we cancel the limitations of life.
Doctor, I'm certain from reading about him and talking with you that you're a pragmatist and you like to demonstrate things. I mean, the healthy thought in the mind really isn't very much good unless it results in something. Have you ever established any kind of experiment to show that the willful thinking on the part of a person has some effect upon physical things?
Oh, we have many ways. We don't have time. We don't have time really to go into it, but there's many ways in which it can be demonstrated. Largely in the biographies of people who found the answer. For instance, here's a man in panic. He was head of an insurance agency. He was facing toward failure. He was using energy to fight what he didn't want. And in counseling, he became to see it. Then finally began to move in the direction of the thing he wanted and use energy for it. And the minute he began to move in that direction, he began to find strength.
Oh, yeah.
And you see, actually then, the infinite mind became a part of his mind. That is, he tuned in. He became aware of it. And last year, that man, this is not the whole test, but he actually made a net of $60,000 writing insurance, which isn't too bad.
No.
But you see, what's more, he's building a profound agency, but the results are within his family, with his wife, with his children, and his basic relationship to the community.
So it's demonstrated.
It absolutely can be demonstrated over and over again.
In one place, you referred here to a very interesting experiment with flowers one time that amazed me. And I'm almost inclined to ask you, was that a truthful experiment?
Well,
a terrible thing to suggest.
I tell you, I was in California once, and I discovered a group of people, very thoughtful people. In fact, one member was from the California Institute of Technology. They took 3 pots of plants, same ground, same water, same fertilizer. One they blessed, one they ignored, and one they cursed. The one they blessed grew voluminously.
Really?
The one they ignored grew normally. The one they cursed died. And I laughed at it. I'm really more of a skeptic at heart than you may think. And I guess you don't get a Ph.D. from University of Chicago.
I was just going to say, haven't you forgotten you have a Ph.D. when you believe
Well,
things
my
like
answer
this?
to you is that every person who has one ought to forget it. Well, anyway, I came back and told my staff about this and laughed about it. And without telling me, they performed the experiment.
As a group, Doctor?
As a group, six of them.
Yes.
And they were amazed with the result. Then I held these three up in the pulpit one Sunday. Some of our scientists laughed at it. A few of them, and let's remember they laughed at Fulton, a few of them took it seriously. And every group who ever demonstrated this seriously has gotten the same result. Now, if you can bless a plant, think what you can do to a person.
To a human who can respond, yes.
I've often watched a baby, a young baby, and he's free of movement. Then you'll see it when it's 5 or 6 years old, and you know that something happened in the relationship between the parents and that baby that squeezed the life out of it.
Yes.
And some of the symptoms are rage, maybe he wets the bed or does something else, which are signs that somebody put the squeeze on him, is squeezing the life out of it. And so the baby's moving towards sickness when really could move toward wholeness.
Doctor, in respect to moving toward wholeness, you say in your book that a man really never dies. You never accept a man as dying.
No, there is no such a thing as death. There's something happens to the body, but we're a part of the universal, and this is immortal. And the real Professor Drake will never die. We refer to it as graduation.
There's a term I meant to question you about. What do you mean by, when you speak of a man leaving his physical environment, so to speak, you speak of him graduating. This sounds promising.
Well, he graduates out of this body of protoplasm into a new body that's spiritual. Incidentally, this is set forth simply in this pamphlet, The Ministry of First Community Church. If any of our hearers would be interested in it, our church would be glad to send a copy.
Well, it's very generous.
Because I think this, that if we get free from the death fear and the death wish, then really we root up all the causes of all fear, and one moves actually into the ultimate, the basic peace.
Dr. Burkhart, I know this is maybe an unfair question in the time we have left, but if I were to take a first step tomorrow in this program which you've outlined in the book, what would I do?
Well, the first step is to want to do something about you.
The desire to change something?
The second step would be maybe to read this book or other books on the field. And then you appraise your situation. Look at your way of thinking and see in how many respects you're going in the directions you don't want to go, and then set up the goals you want to and move in that direction.
I think you can see now why I say that not only the book, but the man, and particularly the philosophy that he has been talking about, has been extremely exciting to me. I hope that it's been exciting to you, that you've enjoyed our visit, and I thank Dr. Burkhart for being our guest today on The Way to Go.
Today's guest was Dr. Roy A. Burkhart, Senior Minister of the First Community Church, Columbus, Ohio. Ormond Drake, Associate Dean of New York University and Director of the Town Hall, is your host. Next week, on The Way to Go, our guest will be Dr. David de Sola Pool, Rabbi of the Spanish and Portuguese Synagogue of New York, the oldest Jewish congregation in the United States. This has been a presentation of the Public Affairs Department, WCBS-TV.